What's up guys, Josh from Xtreme Truck and Auto. Today we're going to be doing a lift on an 04 F150. It's going to be a 6-inch rough country lift, so let's go ahead and dive into this install. It should be a pretty good one. First thing we're going to do is you need to buy yourself a can of this if you're working on something this old. Freol is the best rust penetrant that I have found on market. I like to call it liquid torch because it works really well. But we're going to go through and we're going to soak all of this shenanigans just because I want everything to come free. Whatever you can find, we're gonna be soaking because it's all coming off. You got sway bar bolts, your control arms, upper and lower ball joint, your cross member stuff, strut bolts, and then one thing this kit does come with and we will be replacing is the brake hose. I'm going to get into tearing all this down. Once when we get it teared down and we're getting ready to drop the diff out, I'll show you guys how to do that. If you guys do have questions on the tear down, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll be happy to walk you through the process. I'll post up here on one of the sides another lift video so you can see that whole tear down process, but I'm going to get into this thing and get it ripped apart. So we've got our front end torn down, control arms are off of it, cross member's been removed, drive shaft dropped down. Next thing we're gonna be doing, we kind of already started, is if you see right up in there, we're gonna be removing that bolt, this bolt, and then I think there's one more right back here, and then we'll pull the card under and drop this diff down. Now, one thing there will be on this Ford is a steering rack relocation. That's simple enough. We'll show you how to do that once when we get there. But give us a second. We're gonna remove this diff, get it pulled out, and we'll show you where to cut the frame and all that good stuff. We slide up under here. You'll see I went ahead and already marked the frame. It's the driver's rear that you cut. It is 1 1/8 of an inch from the edge of this hole to that line. And then on the back side, we need this little template that they send with it. And what that is for is, you see that little hole right there? I went ahead and pre-drilled it. Basically, you hold this up there. If I turn out my light real quick, which I'm gonna do, you can see from the back side how it all lines up. And then you have that hole, which in turn ends up right there. So we'll be making that bigger. I just wanted to go ahead and drill it so that way I know where it's at and I'm not fighting it later. But I'm gonna get this all cut out. You can use a Sawzall, cut off wheel, whatever you got laying around. You'll just wanna come back and make sure you get it all cleaned up. I'm gonna blast this off and then it'll be on to putting the diff brackets and the diff back up into this thing. I'm actually waiting on some Sawzall blades to show up to cut that. So while we waited, I went ahead and threw the rack and pinion spacers in here. So if you peek right up in there, you can see the spacer up on top. I don't know if I can get a better angle from this side. It's right up in there. It's a 1-inch spacer. They do send new bolts and new rack and pinion brackets. One thing to keep in mind on the rack and pinion bracket is it is offset to one side or the other of the sleeve. You just want to make sure it's offset up. That's it when it comes to the relocation of this. That was honestly pretty straightforward. We're just gonna keep doing odds and end things until these Sawzall blades show up. But for now, I'm gonna swap over all the hardware on the knuckles to the new knuckle and possibly install the sway bar drop brackets. So we got everything swapped over to the new knuckle. One thing to be careful with is these tiny little 8mm bolts right here. When it's something as old as an 04, they have a tendency to break. I do have extras on hand, but just keep that in mind. If you guys are doing a lift on a vehicle this old, you can go ahead and pre-soak these. The hub bolts are 18mm, and then the front dust shield is 8mm holding that on. That's it when it comes to swapping over the knuckles. So as you can see, we skipped ahead a little bit. We went ahead and got the diff all mounted up there and all the brackets tightened down. There is one that comes off of the diff down here and goes to the steering rack bolt. Easy enough to fix all that. Just basically loosen the nut, slide that on, put that bracket into place. You got cross members in. I will tell you that over here on this side, this little bolt right there was a pain in the butt to get lined up and fit. This bracket's on. One thing I will tell you to do first is put your lower control arms in and the skid plate on before you tighten down the cross member bolts. It just makes everything slide together a lot easier. So we're gonna tighten down those cross member bolts. As you can tell, we're in the process of putting the drive shaft back on it, and then the CV axles. Then after we get all that done, we'll go ahead and throw the struts up into the perch and all that stuff. So we'll hold it into place and then the knuckle will go on. So throughout that process, I'll kind of bring you guys in and out so that way you can see what we're basically doing. So we got our CV axle installed. And one thing I do want to make mention is both the drive shaft and the CV axle take a 12mm socket. So that's the only kind of weird, possibly not run-of-the-mill tool you're going to run into on this installation. We've got our strut put in. I wait to tighten the bolts up top and down low until I've got the knuckle and everything on. One last thing I'm going to mention before I set this camera down and get this knuckle on is there's a little lip on this CV axle. You're going to want to make sure you see this lip on it when you put the shaft into the hub right there, because if you do not, these teeth will not be lined up with the actuator back in the back here, and it will cause issues when they go to put it in four-wheel drive. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to set the camera down and I'm going to lift this heavy butt knuckle up and get it thrown into the truck. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but right inside there is that lip I was talking about. You want to make sure you see that before you put this nut on and tighten it. So we've got our knuckle installed. Now, one thing I did have to do on the knuckle is jack up from underneath it so that way I could get the upper ball joint into the knuckle. I don't know where it's at. I used a pull jack and one under the rear of the truck to do what I needed to. Now, when it comes to these vacuum lines, be very careful, especially on something this old. Pulling down on these, you do have to undo a few things. I'll be pulling these off and then zip tying everything where we need to go. Now, this is the part I'm not looking forward to. It does come with a new set of brake hoses. So as you can tell, these are pretty old. So we're gonna figure out right and left and go from there. But I mean, brake hoses are brake hoses. Essentially what I'm gonna do is put a set of vice grips on here to cut flow to the caliper, then undo the banjo bolt and figure out what line I need for this caliper. Once I get that figured out, we'll fight this end of it, which I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a battle, and we'll get it installed. I'll show you what it looks like all installed and we'll move on from there. So while I'm doing all the brake work on this vehicle, I'm going to have the guy who's helping me out go ahead and tear down the rear end. What this entails is basically shocks. We'll wait to do the U-bolts until we can get a little further into the air. There are a couple of brackets we're going to be installing those. I'll show you once when we get to that step. For right now, we're just starting off with just the basic tear down on the rear. So I've got the new brake hose installed. One thing you do definitely want to check, probably even before you start on this lift and make sure you're going to know if you need calipers or not, is to see if your bleeder screw is going to come undone. This one did, because ironically enough, these bleeder screw covers are really good and keep the salt and stuff out. So zero issue with that. Got the new hose installed. And then one thing I like to do is crack this open and just let it sit until you get a good constant stream of fluid out. That'll make bleeding the brakes 10,000 times faster. This side's done. I got one more side to knock out over here. I'm getting all prepped and ready to go. We got the tie rod ends, the lower cam bolts to tighten, and then the lower strut bolt up here. We went ahead and already did all that. So now here at the back, what you're looking at here is the parking brake cable bracket. You have to undo the cable from up, I'm not sure if you can see it, but right up there is a little bracket you can undo the cable from and slide it out. Now sometimes on these you'll have to do the adjuster. This parking brake cable was already messed up to begin with, so that made our life a lot easier. You undo the cable from here, just slide it out, slide the new one in. You'll have to undo the leaf spring bolt here, and then the 10mm right there, bolt that bracket into place, all of that. And then right back here we've got our brake line drop bracket that gets installed. You undo the tin, you pull it down carefully without kinking your brake lines, and what that does is give you all the slack you're going to need for the electrical harness and the brake lines back here. Final little step back here in the back is going to be undoing the U-bolts, which we've had soaking all day, so those should come apart pretty easily. Installing the new blocks, and then the shocks in the rear. So by the time I'm done with the brake line stuff up in the front, Steve should be done with everything back here, and I can bring you back in and show you what it all looks like assembled. So we got our sway bar on, drop brackets. You basically just reuse the bolts, and then they send new bolts for that. Brake lines are on it, we gotta bleed them, but everything else is tightened up here on the front, so that's wrapped up, good to go. As you can tell by the giant puddle on the floor, we have the brakes bled. That's a very simple process. Essentially, you have somebody sit in the cab, pump the brakes, you tell them to hold it, you loosen the bleeder screw. Once when it goes to the floor, you tighten it back up, you repeat that process over and over until you get good brake pedal. You wanna make sure you start at the furthest away location from the master cylinder. So since I only replaced the front brake lines, we did right front, left front, or passenger front, driver's front. The final step in this process is I'm going to take you back here, show you everything that Steve could accomplish back here. We got the new shocks on, we got our new blocks in. One thing I do like about the rough country blocks is they do have this extra set of U-bolts, and that'll help, one, secure that block better, and two, it also helps with axle wrap a little bit, so that's cool. If we come over to the other side, you can see everything's kind of hooked up and ready to go. We just gotta secure that into there, and then we will be good to go. So I'm gonna get the wheels and tires slapped onto this thing, and then we'll get through all the final shenanigans. So as you can tell, we got the customer supplied wheels and tires on this thing. That's it when it comes to this 6-inch lift on this F150. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I do check those, so I will be answering them as I can. But like always, I'll catch you guys on the next one.